The twin suns of Saris blazed in the sky, their relentless heat pressing down on the endless golden dunes. The desert wind howled, carrying grains of sand that stung against Sarah Valar's exposed skin as she stepped out of the shade of her stone sanctuary. Her veil fluttered in the breeze, but she did not pull it tighter. She wanted to feel the wind, the burn of it, a reminder that she was still alive. She knelt, pressing her fingers into the sand. It was coarse, dry, and lifeless, much like the planet itself. Yet beneath the surface, Saris held secrets. Her visions often showed her fractured glimpses of the world before it was reduced to a wasteland, a time when water filled its basins and the skies were heavy with rain. But these memories were not hers. They were echoes of a galaxy she had never known. A shadow fell over her. Sarah turned slowly, meeting the golden eyes of Aerith Kaltris, heir to the House of Kaltris and her self-appointed warden. His long, angular features were framed by elaborate ceremonial armor, a cruel reminder of the power he wielded over her. "The stars shift tonight," he said, his voice smooth and calculated. "You will read the patterns. The High Council demands clarity on the war fronts." Sarah rose, brushing the sand from her hands. She tilted her head, studying him, though she already knew what she would see. Aerith's confidence masked his desperation. He wanted to hold the balance of power in the galaxy, but his grip was slipping. He needed her to restore it. "I told you," Sarah said, her voice calm yet firm. "The visions do not come on command. The sands speak when they wish to." Aerith's lips curled into a faint smirk. "Then you will sit and listen until they do. Or would you prefer I leave you to the desert?" Sarah did not flinch at his threat. She had spent her life enduring worse. Her existence as the Oracle was one of servitude, her every breath dictated by the whims of those who believed they owned her. But in the quiet moments when no one was watching, she would let her mind drift to the visions, those fleeting glimpses of something vast and unknowable. "I will try," she said, keeping her tone neutral. It was always easier to comply, at least outwardly. Aerith nodded, satisfied, and gestured toward the towering spire in the distance. The Chamber of Sands awaited her, its obsidian walls rising starkly against the desert's golden expanse. Inside, the ancient sands of Saris would speak, and Sarah would listen. She had no choice. The chamber was cold despite the heat outside. The air within was heavy, filled with the scent of burning incense and the faint hum of energy fields that contained the shifting sands at its center. The sands glowed faintly, swirling in chaotic patterns as if alive, responding to her presence. Sarah knelt at the edge of the circular dais, her hands trembling slightly as she reached out. The moment her fingertips touched the surface, the world dissolved into light. Her visions always began this way, blinding, overwhelming, a kaleidoscope of images and sounds that crashed over her like a tidal wave. She saw worlds aflame, fleets of ships tearing through the void, and alien voices shouting in languages she did not understand. But amid the chaos, a single thread of clarity emerged. A shadow. Vast, consuming, and relentless. It spread across the galaxy, devouring stars and leaving only darkness in its wake. Sarah gasped, pulling her hands back as though burned. The sands stilled, their glow fading. Her heart raced, and she struggled to steady her breathing. Aerith watched her from the shadows, his expression unreadable. "What did you see?" he demanded. Sarah met his gaze, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "A war, unlike any before." Aerith froze, his back still turned to her. The silence stretched between them, taut as a drawn bowstring. Finally he spoke, his tone cold and measured. "You forget your place, Oracle. Without me, you would be nothing but a relic buried beneath these sands." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She had learned long ago that defiance, no matter how justified, only brought more pain. Instead, she turned her gaze to the glowing sands, their faint hum still resonating in her bones. Aerith stepped closer, his shadow falling over her once more. You will refine your visions, he commanded. Tonight, under the moons, I will not leave this chamber without the answers I need. Sarah closed her eyes, the weight of his demands pressing down on her. The visions had already drained her, leaving her mind raw and fragile. But she knew Aerith would not relent. He was a man who saw her not as a person, but as a tool, a means to an end. Yes, my lord, she said quietly, the words bitter on her tongue. Satisfied, Aerith turned and left the chamber, the heavy doors sealing shut behind him. Sarah sank to her knees, her hands trembling as she pressed them to the cool stone floor. The sands beneath her pulsed faintly as if in sympathy. In the solitude of the chamber, Sarah allowed herself a rare moment of vulnerability. Tears slipped down her cheeks, though she quickly wiped them away. She could not afford to be weak, not here, not now. The visions had shown her something far worse than Aerith Kaltris or his petty ambitions. The shadow she had seen in the sands was no mere threat to the houses. It was a force that transcended politics, power, and greed. It was ancient, unrelenting, and alive. And it was coming. Sarah placed her hand on the sands once more, her voice barely a whisper. What are you? Why do you haunt me? The sands offered no answer, only the faint hum of energy coursing through them. But deep in her heart, Sarah knew the truth. The twin moons hung low in the sky, casting an eerie silver glow over the desert. From the balcony of his quarters, Aerith Kaltris gazed out at the endless expanse of dunes, his mind churning with thoughts of the Oracle's warning. He had built his life on the foundation of power, alliances, and control. The very idea of an ancient force beyond his understanding was intolerable. But the look in Sarah's eyes haunted him. She was many things, a captive, a tool, a necessary evil, but she was not a liar. Her visions had always proven true, even when they foretold outcomes he wished to avoid. A knock at the door drew him from his thoughts. Enter, he called, his voice steady despite the unease gnawing at him. The door slid open to reveal Velos, his second in command. The alien's skin was a deep shade of crimson, his 4 eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. My lord, Velos said, bowing his head. The council has arrived. They await your report. Aerith's jaw tightened. Of course they do, he muttered. He turned to face Velos, his golden eyes narrowing. Have them wait a little longer. I need time. Velos hesitated. Time, my lord? With respect, the council grows impatient. They do not take kindly to delays. Aerith waved a hand dismissively. Let them stew. They'll wait if they know what's good for them. As Velos left, Aerith turned his gaze back to the desert. He had always prided himself on his ability to outmaneuver his rivals, to see several steps ahead in the game of politics and power. But this was different. For the first time in his life, Aerith Kaltris felt the icy grip of uncertainty. Meanwhile, deep within the chamber, Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor, her hands resting lightly on the sands. The energy coursing through them was weaker now, quieter, as if the visions themselves were retreating. But Sarah knew better. The sands were not silent. They were waiting. A faint sound reached her ears, a whisper, soft and indistinct. At first she thought it was the wind, but as she focused, the sound grew clearer. It was a voice, ancient and layered, speaking in a language she did not understand yet somehow felt within her. The path is woven, the voice said, the words resonating in her mind. The shadow rises. You are the key. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Who are you? She whispered, her voice trembling. What do you mean? The sands beneath her pulsed, glowing faintly. The voice spoke again, its tone more urgent. The chains must break. The truth lies within. Before she could respond, the glow faded, and the chamber fell silent once more. Sarah opened her eyes, her heart pounding in her chest. The visions were not the sands alone. Something else was speaking to her, something that existed beyond the confines of Saris, and it wanted her to act. For a moment the room was silent, the tension between them palpable. Then to her surprise, Aerith laughed, a low, bitter sound that echoed off the chamber walls. "You speak with such conviction," he said, his voice laced with sarcasm, "as though you hold all the answers. But you're just as blind as the rest of us, aren't you? You see fragments, whispers, and you think that makes you special." Syrah's anger flared, but she held it in check. "I didn't ask to be the oracle," she said quietly, "but I won't stand by and watch you ignore the truth." Aerith stepped closer, his golden eyes locking onto hers. "Then give me the truth, Sarah. Not riddles, not metaphors. What do you see?" She hesitated, her mind racing. The visions were chaotic, fragmented, but one image stood out. The shadow, vast and unrelenting, consuming the stars. It wasn't a metaphor, it was real. But how could she make him understand? "The shadow," she said finally. "It's alive. It doesn't want to conquer. It wants to erase. And it's coming for Saris." Aerith's expression darkened, his usual arrogance giving way to something colder. "Saris," he repeated. "Why here?" "I don't know," Syrah admitted. "But the sands do. And if you keep forcing me to look into them, you'll only make it stronger." Aerith stared at her for a long moment, his mind clearly racing. Then he turned abruptly, his robes swirling around him as he strode toward the door. "Prepare yourself," he said over his shoulder. "We leave for the capital at first light. The council will hear your warning, whether they like it or not." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as the door slammed shut behind him. The capital. The very thought of it filled her with dread. She had never left Saris, never been beyond the dunes and the sanctuary of the sands. The idea of standing before the High Council, of being paraded as the last human, was almost too much to bear. But she had no choice. The shadow was coming, and if no one listened to her here, perhaps they would listen there. The night passed in a haze of restless dreams and fractured visions. Sarah saw ships burning in the void, their hulls torn apart by an unseen force. She saw alien cities crumbling into ash, their people swallowed by darkness. And always, at the center of it all, she saw the shadow, a vast, shapeless entity that defied comprehension. When dawn broke, she was already awake, her eyes heavy with exhaustion but her resolve unshaken. The transport ship waited on the edge of the settlement, its sleek, angular design a sharp contrast to the ancient stone structures of Saris. Aerith stood by the boarding ramp, flanked by a squad of Kaltris soldiers. Sarah approached slowly, her movements deliberate. She could feel the eyes of the soldiers on her, their expressions a mix of curiosity and suspicion. To them, she was an enigma, a relic of a dead species, valuable only for the visions she provided. Aerith gestured for her to board, his golden eyes scanning the horizon. "The sands have been quiet," he said, his tone unreadable. "Almost too quiet." Sarah hesitated, her gaze drifting to the dunes. The sands did feel different, as though they were holding their breath. She placed a hand on the ground, closing her eyes, but felt nothing. Whatever the shadow was, it had shifted its focus. The transport's engines roared to life as the ship lifted off, its thrusters kicking up clouds of sand. Sarah sat in silence, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she stared out the viewport. The dunes stretched endlessly below, a sea of gold broken only by the jagged spires of ancient ruins. Aerith sat across from her, his expression thoughtful. "Tell me something, Oracle," he said suddenly. "Do you ever see yourself in your visions?" Sarah blinked, caught off guard by the question. "No," she said after a moment. "The visions aren't about me. They're about the galaxy." "And yet," Aerith said, leaning forward, "you seem to believe you're at the center of it all. Why is that?" She met his gaze, her voice steady. "Because I'm the last human, and for some reason the sands chose me." Aerith smirked, but there was no humor in it. "The sands are fickle. They'll abandon you the moment you're no longer useful. Sarah said nothing, her eyes drifting back to the viewport. The dunes gave way to rocky plains, then to sprawling cities of gleaming metal and glass. The capital loomed ahead, its towers piercing the sky like jagged blades. As the ship descended, Sarah felt a knot of unease tighten in her chest. The council would not welcome her warning, she knew that much. But she also knew she had to try, because if the shadow reached Saris, it wouldn't stop there. It would consume everything. The council chamber was silent, the air heavy with tension as Sarah stood before the assembled alien lords. Their towering forms, draped in regal armor and adorned with symbols of their houses, cast long shadows under the cold light of the chamber's crystal dome. Above them, the swirling void of space was visible, dotted with the distant light of stars that Sarah knew were already doomed. Aerith Caltrus stood beside her, his golden eyes scanning the room with calculated precision. He had delivered her to them, the Oracle of Saris, the last human, the one who had foreseen the end. But now, as Sarah prepared to speak, she felt his doubt pressing against her like a blade. "The shadow you deny," she began, her voice clear and unwavering, "is not a myth. It is here. It has already begun." One of the lords, a towering creature with crystalline skin and multiple glowing eyes, scoffed. "And why should we believe the visions of a dying species?" His voice was cold, dismissive. Sarah stepped forward, her gaze steady. "Because I've seen it. I've felt it. And now, so have you." The chamber trembled. A deep, resonant hum echoed through the walls, rattling the crystalline dome above. Gasps and murmurs spread through the lords as the sands of Saris, brought from the desert to fuel the house's rituals, began to glow. The same ancient energy that had whispered to Sarah now pulsed with a furious intensity, reacting to the presence of the shadow that had finally arrived. Horror gripped the room. The stars beyond the dome were vanishing, swallowed by an encroaching darkness that moved like a living thing. Ships, stations, entire systems, all consumed in moments by the shadow's unrelenting tide. Sarah closed her eyes, placing her hands on the glowing sands at her feet. "It doesn't want to conquer," she said softly. "It wants to erase, and it begins with us." Aerith turned to her, his voice sharp. "What do we do? How do we stop it?" She looked up at him, her expression calm. "We can't stop it, but I can hold it." Before he could protest, the sands surged upward, encasing Sarah in a spiraling cocoon of golden light. Her body rose from the floor, the energy coursing through her as the sands spoke their final truth. She was the key, the last remnant of humanity's ancient bond with the stars, the only force capable of stalling the shadow. The lords cried out as the chamber filled with blinding light. Sarah's voice echoed, calm yet unyielding. "Leave. Warn the galaxy. What remains must unite or all will be lost." Aerith hesitated, his golden eyes locked on hers. For the first time he saw her not as a tool, but as something far greater. "Sarah, go!" she commanded, her voice breaking through the chaos. The sands erupted, enveloping the chamber in a golden wave that pushed the lords and Aerith out through the massive doors. The last thing Aerith saw as the doors sealed was Sarah, glowing with an otherworldly light, her body dissolving into the sands as they rose to meet the shadow. From the deserts of Saris, a beacon of light shot into the void, slamming into the advancing darkness. The shadow slowed, its relentless march halted but not defeated. The galaxy had been given time to prepare, to unite, to fight. Aerith stood on the barren sands, staring at the distant glow. The last human was gone, but her sacrifice had become legend. The sands of Saris whispered her name, and across the galaxy, her story began to spread.